On the eastern edge of the vast Sahara Desert, a turquoise ribbon meanders. For thousands of years it has witnessed the passage of stars and chronicled the rise and fall of dynasties. It is the Nile. This river of life not only nourished the land but also nurtured one of the most breathtaking civilizations in human history: ancient Egypt. When the towering pyramids rose from the Giza Plateau, when the pharaoh's scepter commanded the submission of all people, when hieroglyphs recorded the legends of the gods, the world held its breath. People cannot help but ask, how could such a brilliant, mature, and well-structured civilization have miraculously emerged from the mists of prehistory thousands of years ago? Did it truly blossom from the desert overnight? Or before this, was there a long and hidden prelude? Today we will part the mists of history, travel upstream against the river of time, to seek the very origins of ancient Egyptian civilization. This is not a simple story, but a journey filled with the unknown and surprises. In those years buried by yellow sand, what exactly happened? What power brought together scattered tribes dwelling on both banks of the river, eventually forming a unified kingdom and creating such a splendid culture? This first question is the starting point of our exploration. To understand Egypt, one must first understand the Nile. This longest river in the world was the cradle of ancient Egyptian civilization and its eternal mother. Every summer, rainwater from the Ethiopian plateau would cause the Nile's water level to surge, and the flood, carrying fertile silt, would inundate the lands on both banks. When the floodwaters receded, they left behind a thick layer of nutrient-rich black soil, which the ancient Egyptians called Kemet, meaning the Black Land. This seemingly catastrophic flood was, in fact, the gift upon which the Egyptians depended for survival. It brought the possibility of agriculture, turning the originally barren desert edges into a bountiful granary. However, the Nile was not always gentle. Insufficient flooding meant famine. Excessive flooding meant villages destroyed. The early Egyptians had to learn to seek a balance for survival and development while dancing with this capricious dragon. The Nile was both a bestower of life and a harsh tester. It shaped the land of Egypt, and even more so, it shaped the character and wisdom of the Egyptians. They learned to observe the stars to predict floods, learned to build dikes and canals to utilize water resources. This struggle and cooperation with nature was the initial driving force of civilization. In the distant prehistoric era, from approximately 5000 BCE to 4000 BCE, the Nile Valley was not a place of silence. Archaeological discoveries have revealed traces of early human activity. In the Tassa region of central Egypt, the remains of the earliest agricultural communities have been found. These Tassians had already begun to cultivate grains, raise livestock, and make pottery with simple decorations. Their lives marked the initial transition of Egypt's early inhabitants from nomadic hunter-gathering to settled agriculture. Following them was the Bedtime culture. Their settlements were more stable, and their agricultural technology had also improved. The pottery made by the Bedouins was more exquisite, with extremely thin walls and a smooth, polished surface, displaying a unique ripple pattern. More importantly, in their tombs we have found the earliest ivory and stone combs, palettes, and simple jewelry. These items not only reflect the awakening of their aesthetic consciousness, but also hint at social differentiation and the budding of primitive beliefs. These faint lights of civilization, like stars in the night sky, though dim, heralded the coming of a great era. With the stability of settled life and the development of agriculture, the population gradually increased, and social structures began to become more complex. To organize water irrigation, distribute resources, and defend against external enemies, individuals with leadership skills and prestige began to emerge, becoming early tribal chieftains. During this period, totem worship became prevalent. Different tribes might have worshipped different animal deities such as hawks, snakes, or scorpions. These totems were not only symbols of the tribes but also gradually evolved into the prototypes of early deities and became closely integrated with the power of the chieftains. During the Nakada culture period, circa 4000 BCE to 3200 BCE, this trend of power concentration became increasingly evident. Archaeologists have discovered larger tombs, some of whose owners possessed abundant grave goods, including mace heads symbolizing power and exquisite weapons. This indicates that social stratification was intensifying, and a privileged class had already emerged. These chieftains holding power continuously expanded their spheres of influence through warfare, marriage alliances, or religious influence, laying the foundation for the eventual formation of a unified state. Before the advent of the dynastic era, the Nile Valley gradually formed two relatively independent political and cultural centers: Upper Egypt in the south, which primarily worshipped the hawk god Horus, its crown being the tall white crown, and Lower Egypt in the north near the Nile Delta, with the cobra goddess Wadjet as its guardian deity, its crown being the low red crown. These two regions differed in geographical environment, economic models, and cultural traditions. Upper Egypt had a long, narrow terrain and relied more on direct irrigation from the Nile. Its people were also relatively more martial. Lower Egypt, situated in the open delta, had a dense network of rivers, developed agriculture, and more prosperous commerce. The competition and integration, conflict and exchange between these two regions constituted the main theme of the late pre-dynastic period. The desire for unification, like an undercurrent hidden beneath the waters of the Nile, surged powerfully. Who could end this state of division? Who could combine the red and white crowns symbolizing Upper and Lower Egypt and place them on the head of a single ruler? Two cultures, two forces, were quietly accumulating the energy to change the course of history on the stage of the Nile. A great unification was about to unfold on the horizon. That would be who and in what way would forever connect this land. The dawn of the Nile was ushering in its most dazzling light. The murmur of the Nile's waves seemed to herald an impending dramatic change. The white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt had long symbolized a divided land and opposing forces. However, the torrent of history never stands still. It seeks a hero capable of mastering its turbulent waves, a king who can stitch back together this land divided by the river. The desire for unification, like a stone cast into a calm lake, sent ripples gradually expanding throughout the entire Nile Valley. Before Narmer, a vague figure flickered in the dawn of history. He was the legendary Scorpion King. Records about him are like mirages by the Nile, both captivating and elusive. The most famous piece of evidence is a mace head, engraved with a scorpion and stars, discovered in Hierakonpolis. On it, a king wearing the white crown holds a hoe, seemingly presiding over some canal digging or foundation laying ceremony. Before him, the scorpion totem is clearly visible. Who was this Scorpion King? Was he the forerunner who ignited the flame of unification? Historians are still debating. His mace head suggests his ruling status in Upper Egypt and his emphasis on agriculture and water conservancy projects. Some scholars believe he might have already begun to exert influence beyond Upper Egypt, even launching some conquest wars, laying a preliminary foundation for later unification. However, due to the lack of more direct written records, the story of the Scorpion King remains largely in the realm of intriguing speculation. He is like a character in a prologue, setting a mysterious and solemn stage for the true protagonist's entrance. when the historical spotlight finally illuminated, a ruler named Narmer stepped onto the central stage of Egyptian unification with an irrefutable presence. His achievements were eternally engraved on a greenish-gray stone slab, less than a meter high yet bearing the immense weight of history. This is the world-renowned Narmer Palette. Discovered in Hierakonpolis, one of early Egypt's capitals, meaning City of the Hawk, this artifact is not merely an exquisite piece of art but an epic written in images, a milestone proclaiming the unification of Egypt. On one side of the palette, Narmer, wearing the white crown symbolizing Upper Egypt, raises his mace about to strike a kneeling enemy. This enemy is generally considered a symbol of Lower Egypt. Behind him is a servant holding his sandals and a water pot, symbolizing the pharaoh's purity and sanctity. In the sky, the hawk god Horus presents a clump of papyrus with a human head on it, symbolizing Lower Egypt to the pharaoh, signifying divine approval of this conquest. This is not just a scene of conquest, but a declaration of divinely sanctioned kingship and order, triumphing over chaos. Turning to the other side of the palette, the scene is more complex and symbolic. At the very top, Narmer, wearing the red crown symbolizing Lower Egypt, inspects a row of decapitated enemies. Before him are standards representing various regions. Below the necks of two long-necked mythical beasts, serpopards, are strangely intertwined, led by two tamers, usually interpreted as the final fusion and unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. At the very bottom, a bull is smashing a city wall with its horns and trampling an enemy, symbolizing the pharaoh's invincible power. The Narmer palette, with its rich symbolism and vivid scenes, shows us the brutality of the unification war and the establishment of the new royal power. It clearly indicates that Narmer, this ruler from Upper Egypt, successfully conquered Lower Egypt and combined the red and white crowns, becoming the common king of Upper and Lower Egypt. This moment, around 3100 BCE, is considered the beginning of the first dynasty of ancient Egypt and the birth of the first unified nation-state in human history. Narmer's name has since been closely linked with the unification of Egypt, becoming an eternal legend. A unified kingdom needed a unified capital. Narmer, or his immediate successors, understood the importance of geographical location. They set their sights on the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt, at the apex of the Nile Delta. Here, a new city rose: Memphis. Choosing Memphis as the capital was a decision of great strategic vision. It was perfectly situated at the hinge between the narrow valley of Upper Egypt and the open delta of Lower Egypt, allowing for effective control of both north and south, as well as convenient use of the Nile for transportation and trade. Legend has it that to build Memphis, the pharaoh even ordered the construction of a dam, altering part of the Nile's course. The city was initially called Inebhej, White Walls, possibly because its walls were built of white mud bricks, or to symbolize the white crown and purity of Upper Egypt. Memphis rapidly developed into the political, religious, and cultural center of the new dynasty. The craftsman god Ptah was revered as the chief god of Memphis, symbolizing creation and skill. Here, pharaohs planned state affairs, received tribute from various regions, and issued decrees. Memphis, as the first true capital in Egyptian history, witnessed the consolidation and development of the early dynasties and, for the next several centuries, played a crucial role, becoming one of the hearts of Egyptian political, religious, and cultural life for the next 3 millennia. Its establishment marked that a unified, centralized Egyptian state was beginning to get on track. The unification initiated by Narmer was not achieved once and for all. During the subsequent First and Second Dynasties, circa 3100 BCE, 2686 BCE, the pharaoh's main task was to consolidate this hard-won unity and gradually establish an effective system of state administration. Central to this was the establishment and strengthening of the concept of divine kingship. In the minds of the ancient Egyptians, the pharaoh was not merely a terrestrial ruler, but an incarnation of a god on earth, a bridge connecting the divine and human realms. They were regarded as the earthly representatives of the hawk god Horus, possessing supreme power. Every act of the pharaoh was imbued with sacred meaning. They renewed and reinforced their divine power and ruling legitimacy through complex religious ceremonies such as the Hebsed festival. This deified kingship provided a powerful spiritual pillar and organizational core for the stability and development of early Egyptian society. At royal necropolises like Abydos, we see the enormous tombs of early pharaohs. Although these tombs were not yet the world-famous pyramids of later times, their scale and the richness of their grave goods already demonstrated the pharaoh's transcendent status. Around the tombs, even large numbers of sacrificial human remains have been found. Servants and officials of the pharaoh, believed to continue serving him in the afterlife. This cruel custom, though later gradually replaced by symbolic figurines, also reflected from one perspective the absolute majesty of early kingship. A unified kingdom with vast territories required an effective tool to transmit decrees, record taxes, praise achievements, and pass on beliefs. Thus, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs came into being and were further developed and standardized during the early dynastic period. These sacred carvings, as hieroglyphs were known, were both pictures and sounds as well as carriers of thought. They were inscribed on stelae, written on papyrus, recording the pharaoh's great deeds and managing the state's granaries and finances. Accompanying the development of writing was the initial formation of a bureaucratic system. To manage the vast land and complex social affairs, the pharaoh needed a group of professional officials to assist him. A bureaucratic network of scribes, officials, and various departments began to form, responsible for executing the pharaoh's will and managing the daily affairs of the state, such as collecting taxes, organizing labor, and maintaining water facilities. Although the bureaucratic system of this period was still imperfect, it laid the foundation for the highly developed administration of the later Old Kingdom period. Narmer's unification was like injecting a powerful life force into ancient Egyptian civilization. The unification of the two crowns was not just a territorial unification, but also an initial integration of culture and belief. Within the walls of Memphis, between the strokes of hieroglyphs and under the sacred aura of the pharaoh, a great civilization was accumulating strength. The cornerstone of ancient Egyptian civilization had been laid, its outline becoming increasingly clear. The scroll of history was slowly unfurling, and a more glorious era was about to begin on the banks of the Nile. The following chapters will witness the rise of the most breathtaking architectural marvel in human history, the pyramids. As unified Egypt began to take shape under Narmer's firm hand, as the walls of Memphis heralded the advent of a new era, an unprecedented ambition began to sprout on the banks of the Nile. The pharaoh's authority was no longer satisfied merely with ruling the present world. They began to yearn for an immortality that transcended death. This yearning, like a dormant giant stone, awaited the awakening by a genius, and would eventually stand on the sands of Giza in a manner that would astonish and awe for millennia to come. This was the most dazzling symbol of the Old Kingdom period, circa 2686 BCE, 2181 BCE, the pyramids. Before the magnificent silhouette of the pyramid was cast upon the land, Egyptian royal tombs underwent a long evolution. Early pharaohs were content with constructing mud brick or stone rectangular flat-topped tombs known as mastabas in places like Abydos or Saqqara. These mastabas, meaning bench, had relatively simple internal structures, mainly for housing the pharaoh's body and grave goods. However, as royal power became increasingly consolidated and deified, the pharaoh's demands for their tombs also grew. They needed a structure that could better manifest their supreme status and divine power. The turning point in history occurred during the reign of the third dynasty pharaoh Djoser. Djoser was a monarch of vision and courage, but a genius beside him. Imhotep put his ambitions into practice. Imhotep, this legendary figure who was a vizier, high priest, physician, astronomer, and architect, was later revered as a god of wisdom. Under Imhotep's planning, a bold architectural innovation unfolded on the Saqqara Plateau. He did not follow the traditional single-layer mastaba structure, but, on the foundation of a huge mastaba, stacked 5 smaller mastabas layer by layer, forming a 6-tiered 62-meter-high step pyramid. This was the first true pyramid in Egyptian history, Djoser's Step Pyramid. It was not just a breakthrough in scale, but a leap in architectural concept. The steps were considered a stairway for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to heaven, connecting the human world with the divine realm. The entire pyramid was surrounded by a vast complex of funerary buildings, including temples, courtyards, and symbolic palaces, forming an eternal city of the netherworld. The appearance of Djoser's Step Pyramid announced the maturity of ancient Egyptian architectural art and also heralded the construction of even more magnificent pyramids to come. As the wheels of history rolled into the 4th dynasty, the national strength of ancient Egypt reached an unprecedented peak. The pharaohs possessed almost limitless power and resources, and their ambitions swelled to the extreme. They were no longer satisfied with step pyramids, but pursued a more perfect geometric form, pointing towards the sun god Ra, the true pyramid. Thus, on the Giza Plateau southwest of Cairo, the most breathtaking marvels in human architectural history began to rise one by one. First to appear was the Great Pyramid of Pharaoh Khufu. This pyramid is the largest of the 3 Giza pyramids, and the only surviving wonder of the ancient world. It originally stood about 146.6 meters tall, and was constructed from over 2.3 million massive stone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, with some exceeding 15 tons. These blocks were primarily quarried from local Giza limestone, while the smooth white limestone used to case the pyramid's surface came from the Tura quarries across the Nile, and the granite for the internal burial chamber came from distant Aswan. The construction of Khufu's pyramid was a system engineering project of unimaginable scale. It was not merely a simple stacking of stones. The complexity of its internal structure, the precision of its angles, and the accuracy of its orientation, almost perfectly aligned to true north, are all astounding. Tens of thousands of laborers under the scorching sun, relying on primitive tools, copper chisels, stone hammers, levers, and ramps, quarried, transported, dressed, and lifted these heavy stones to dizzying heights. They were not slaves, as past legends suggested, but organized, state-supported freemen who participated in this sacred project during the Nile's flood season when farming was impossible. Following Khufu, his son Khafre built the second-largest pyramid at Giza. Although slightly smaller than Khufu's pyramid, its higher elevation and the partial preservation of its original casing stones at the top make it visually seem comparable to Khufu's pyramid. Khafre's pyramid is perhaps best known for its associated structure, the Sphinx. This colossal statue, with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh, believed to be Khafre's likeness, silently guards the front of the pyramid complex, gazing eastward, as if awaiting the daily sunrise and witnessing millennia of vicissitudes. The third major pyramid at Giza belongs to Pharaoh Menkaure. It is much smaller than the previous two, but its lower portion was cased in red granite from Aswan, indicating different aesthetic pursuits and possibly changing national strength. The construction of Menkaure's pyramid seems to mark the passing of the peak of the massive pyramid-building frenzy. The Giza pyramid complex is not just the tombs of pharaohs. They are declarations of state power, manifestations of religious belief, and materializations of the ancient Egyptians' cosmology. Like solidified prayers, they point to the sky, yearning for eternity. Their very existence is a huge mystery, attracting countless people to explore their construction secrets, inherent wisdom, and hidden symbolic meanings. The rise of the pyramids was inextricably linked to the flourishing cult of the sun god Ra during the Old Kingdom. Starting from the 4th dynasty, pharaohs began to associate their names with the god Ra, such as son of Ra, Sa-Re. They were no longer merely incarnations of Horus, but were also considered sons of the sun god. This theological shift further strengthened the legitimacy and sanctity of royal power. The form of the pyramid itself carried strong solar symbolism. Its capstone, the Benben stone, was believed to be the sacred stone first touched by the sun's rays at dawn, symbolizing creation and rebirth. The pharaoh's soul would ascend along the pyramid slopes into the sky, merge with the sun god Ra, and attain eternal life. To worship the sun god, pharaohs also built sun temples near the pyramids. These temples usually featured a large open courtyard with an obelisk in the center, symbolizing the sun's rays. The ruins of 5th dynasty sun temples found in places like Abu Ghurab clearly display this unique architectural form. The popularization of sun god worship not only influenced funerary architecture but also deeply permeated the religion, art, and daily life of the Old Kingdom period. The construction of the pyramids required a highly organized, strictly hierarchical society as support. During the Old Kingdom, Egyptian society formed a pyramid-like structure, with the pharaoh at the apex, possessing absolute power. Below the pharaoh was a vast bureaucracy. The vizier was the highest administrative official of the state, responsible for managing various departments including finance, justice, agriculture, and the military. Nomarchs, governors, were responsible for managing local administrative districts, nomes. The scribe class, possessing the power of writing and record-keeping, played a crucial role in state administration. The priestly class also wielded great influence, responsible for conducting various religious ceremonies and managing temple property. Craftsmen, artists, soldiers, farmers, and laborers constituted the main body of society. Farmers were the foundation of Egyptian society, toiling in the fields to provide food for the entire nation. During the off-season for farming, many of them would be conscripted to participate in large-scale state projects, such as pyramid construction and the maintenance of irrigation facilities. Although strictly hierarchical, Old Kingdom society was not entirely rigid. Talented individuals, even from humble backgrounds, could potentially achieve promotion through their own efforts. In tomb murals, we see vivid scenes of ancient Egyptian life. Farmers working in the fields, fishermen fishing on the Nile, craftsmen making exquisite objects in workshops, and nobles enjoying banquets and hunting. These lively depictions sketch out an ancient kingdom full of vitality and order. The Old Kingdom, the era that created the miracle of the pyramids, was not eternal. After its glorious peak, some ominous shadows began to quietly grow. The large-scale construction of pyramids consumed enormous national manpower, material, and financial resources. Pharaohs, to reward meritorious officials and priests, continuously granted land and privileges, which to some extent weakened central authority. The power of local nomarchs gradually grew. They began to make their positions hereditary, reducing their dependence on the central government, and even started building their own lavish tombs, challenging the pharaoh's authority. Climate change may also have played a significant role. There is evidence that during the late Old Kingdom, the Nile's water levels may have experienced a sustained decline, leading to agricultural failures and famine, shaking the foundations of society. By the end of the 6th dynasty, after the exceptionally long reign of Pepi II, though this figure is still disputed, the central government's control sharply declined. The decline of royal power, the rise of local forces coupled with possible natural disasters, collectively pushed the Old Kingdom to the brink of collapse. The Age of Pyramids, after creating immortal splendor, also met its own dusk. A period of division and chaos was about to arrive. The first great chapter of ancient Egyptian history slowly drew to a close amidst glory and underlying concerns. What awaited Egypt next was a dark age full of unknowns and turmoil. As the afterglow of the pyramids on the Giza Plateau gradually dimmed, and as the pharaoh's authority no longer shone like the sun across the land, ancient Egypt entered a long and painful interlude. This era, known as the First Intermediate Period, approximately 2181 BCE, 2055 BCE, was a dark time of central authority collapse, fragmentation by local powers, social disorder, and widespread suffering among the people. The once unified and powerful kingdom seemed to plunge into an abyss overnight, and the song of the Nile turned into a mournful elegy. The exceptionally long reign of Pepi II at the end of the Old Kingdom was like a candle burning out its last flicker of dynastic glory. After him, the succeeding pharaohs were weak and ineffective, unable to effectively control the vast territories. The local nomarchs, once loyal to the pharaoh, sensed a power vacuum. They were no longer content to merely act as the pharaoh's representatives, but began to cultivate their own power bases, raise armies within their domains, and effectively became independent petty monarchs. These local nobles, springing up like mushrooms after rain, turned their nomes, provinces into hereditary territories, warring incessantly among themselves for land, resources, and influence. Unified Egypt shattered into countless mutually hostile small kingdoms and principalities. Although the central government in Memphis nominally still existed, its decrees could no longer pass beyond the city gates of the capital, and the pharaoh's dignity plummeted. They were no longer the incarnation of a god on earth, but rather puppets manipulated by local magnates. Archaeological discoveries also corroborate the chaos of this period. In the tombs of local nomarchs, titles and symbols previously reserved for pharaohs appeared, and their tombs were exceedingly lavish, attempting to rival royal burials. Such acts of usurpation clearly reflect the decline of central authority and the swelling of local power. Wealth that once flowed to the center was now intercepted locally, used to support the armies of the local nobility and satisfy their private desires. To truly grasp the suffering and despair of the First Intermediate Period, nothing is more impactful than the literature of the time. A papyrus document titled The Admonitions of Ipuwer, with its tear-soaked words, paints a shocking picture of the social landscape. Ipuwer, a wise sage, issued a heart-wrenching lament to the heavens and possibly to the reigning monarch, denouncing the chaos and injustice he witnessed. Behold, the affairs of the land are overturned, Ipuwer lamented. The poor have become rich, and the rich are made poor. Thieves are everywhere, the Nile is in flood, yet none farm. Noble women are homeless, toiling like servant girls. Laughter has ceased, lamentation is throughout the land. Brother turns against brother, father against son. His words are filled with fear of the collapse of order, anger at the subversion of social ethics, and deep anxiety about the future. The scenes described in The Admonitions of Epure may be a literary exaggeration of the social reality of the time, but it undoubtedly reflects the widespread instability of the first intermediate period. Laws were disregarded, morals decayed, famine spread, and the threat of foreign invasion was ever present. Pharaoh's tombs and temples, once considered sacred and inviolable, may have been plundered and desecrated amidst the chaos. This was a period of disorder in Egyptian history, where Ma'at, the goddess symbolizing justice, order, and harmony, cherished by the ancient Egyptians, seemed to have abandoned them. The collapse of the central government directly led to the neglect and disrepair of the Nile's irrigation system. Canals became clogged and dikes crumbled, severely impacting agricultural production. Some archaeological and climatological studies suggest that this period might indeed have experienced prolonged droughts and low Nile water levels, leading to even more severe food shortages. Famine, like a phantom, haunted the Nile Valley. In the tomb inscriptions of some local nobles, they proudly claim to have provided relief to their people during years of famine, indirectly confirming the widespread existence of hunger. When mere survival became a problem, social contradictions naturally intensified. Displaced people rose up, bandits roamed, and small-scale conflicts and wars broke out one after another. The people struggled in hunger, fear, and despair, praying for the return of order and the compassion of the gods. This prolonged instability also had a profound impact on the ancient Egyptian spiritual world. They began to question traditional beliefs and values. The sanctity of the pharaoh was shaken, and ideas about the afterlife also changed. A more personalized religious sentiment, emphasizing individual morality and responsibility, began to emerge. People no longer relied solely on the pharaoh as the sole intermediary to the divine realm, but began to seek a more direct connection with the gods. Amidst the long darkness and chaos, a faint glimmer of hope began to quietly emerge in the south. Thebes, a previously inconspicuous town in Upper Egypt during the Old Kingdom, gradually accumulated strength and began to play a historical role. The rulers of Thebes, primarily worshipping the local deity Montu, a hawk-headed war god, diligently worked to restore internal order, build up strength, and gradually established a relatively stable and powerful regime in the south. Meanwhile, in the north, the rulers of another power center, Heracleopolis, also attempted to restore order and claimed to be legitimate successors to the pharaohs. Thus, Thebes and Heracleopolis engaged in a prolonged standoff and war for control over all of Egypt. This struggle between the north and south lasted for decades. The rulers of Thebes, such as the Intef and Mentuhotep families, demonstrated exceptional military talent and political wisdom. They advanced northward step by step, gradually encroaching upon the territory of the Heracleopolitan dynasty. This was a process full of blood and fire, and also the birth pangs of Egypt's reunification. Finally, around 2055 BCE, Pharaoh Mentuhotep II from Thebes achieved a decisive victory, defeating his Heracleopolitan rivals and reunifying Upper and Lower Egypt. The era of chaos, which had lasted for over a century, came to an end, and a new page in Egyptian history was turned. Though the lament of the first intermediate period was regrettable, it also served as a harsh test, instilling new resilience into Egyptian civilization. Egypt, rising from the ashes, would usher in an era of resurgence known as the Middle Kingdom. Thebes, once a remote city, would thus ascend to the center stage of history, becoming the religious and political core of future Egypt. As the dust of the first intermediate period settled, and as the battle flags of Thebes were planted across both banks of the Nile, the pendulum of Egyptian history swung once again from division and chaos towards unity and revival. Marked by the victory of Mentuhotep II, ancient Egypt entered the period known as the Middle Kingdom, approximately 2055 BCE, 1650 BCE. This was not merely a simple replication of the Old Kingdom's splendor, but a new era, more mature and humanistic after experiencing trauma and reflection, and reaching new heights in literature and art. Thebes, once a southern stronghold, was thus crowned, becoming the religious and cultural center of this new era. Mentuhotep II, this ruler from the 11th dynasty of Thebes, is undoubtedly the true founder of the Middle Kingdom. With unyielding determination and outstanding military prowess, he ended over a century of fragmentation, reuniting a shattered Egypt into a cohesive whole. His victory was not just a military conquest, but also a rebuilding of national order and public confidence. After reunification, Mentuhotep II faced arduous tasks. He needed to appease a populace traumatized by prolonged warfare, rebuild damaged infrastructure, restore the central government's authority, and curb the power of local nobles who had grown strong during the period of division. He implemented a series of administrative reforms, redividing administrative regions and strengthening control over local areas. Simultaneously, he also displayed a degree of tolerance and reconciliation, attempting to integrate former rivals into the new state system. At Deir el-Bahari on the west bank of Thebes, Mentuhotep II built a unique mortuary temple for himself. This structure incorporated elements of traditional mastabas, pyramids, and terrace temples, and its distinct design philosophy heralded the innovation in Middle Kingdom architectural style. Statues discovered in the tomb depict the pharaoh as majestic and resolute, portrayed as an energetic ruler, symbolizing Egypt's rebirth and strength. Mentuhotep II's accomplishments laid a solid foundation for the prosperity of the Middle Kingdom, and his name, closely linked with Egypt's reunification, was remembered by later generations. With the elevation of Thebes's political status, its local chief god Amun also rose in prominence. During the Old Kingdom, Amun was originally an inconspicuous local deity, whose name meant the Hidden One. However, when the rulers of Thebes became pharaohs of all Egypt, the cult of Amun spread throughout the country. To further consolidate Thebes's central position and the legitimacy of the new dynasty, the pharaohs combined Amun with the ancient sun god Ra, forming the new chief deity, Amun-Ra. This supreme god, who merged various divine aspects such as creation, life, kingship, and cosmic order, became the most important deity in Egypt during the Middle Kingdom and later the New Kingdom. On the east bank of Thebes, a magnificent temple complex began to be built, the famous Karnak Temple. It may have initially been only a small sanctuary for Amun, but during the Middle Kingdom, through continuous expansion by successive pharaohs, it gradually revealed its monumental grandeur. Massive columns, courtyards, sanctuaries, and obelisks all highlight the exalted status of Amun and the pharaoh's devotion to the deity. The construction of Karnak Temple was not only a manifestation of religious belief, but also a symbol of the close integration of royal and divine power. Thebes, made more glorious by Amun's honor and by the presence of Karnak Temple, became the center of Egyptian religious life, attracting pilgrims from all over. If the Old Kingdom was characterized by its towering pyramids, then one of the most commendable achievements of the Middle Kingdom was its unprecedented flourishing of literature. After experiencing the turmoil and reflection of the First Intermediate Period, Egyptian literati began to create works of greater depth, richer human concern, and closer to real life. The literary works of this period are regarded by later generations as the golden age of ancient Egyptian literature. Among these, the story of Sinuhe is the most representative. This first-person adventure story recounts the experiences of the protagonist Sinuhe, who, fearing a palace coup after the death of Pharaoh Amenemhat I, fled to the Syria-Palestine region. He succeeded in a foreign land through his wisdom and courage, but in his heart, he always longed for his homeland, Egypt. Ultimately, the aged Sinuhe was pardoned by the new pharaoh, allowed to return home in honor, and was grandly buried. The story of Sinuhe is not just a captivating adventure tale. It delicately portrays the protagonist's inner world, his fear, loneliness, homesickness, and attachment to Egyptian culture. This work, with its beautiful language, intricate plot, and profound reflections on human nature, destiny, and national identity, is considered a pinnacle of ancient Egyptian literature, widely circulated in later generations, and even influenced the literary creations of other civilizations. In addition to narrative literature, wisdom literature also reached new heights during the Middle Kingdom. These works often appeared in the form of instructions, proverbs, or dialogues, exploring life philosophies, social ethics, the way of governing, and how to achieve happiness and success. For example, the Instructions of Amenemhat is said to be the testament written by Pharaoh Amenemhat I to his son Senusret I, full of profound insights into political maneuvering, human nature, and ruling experience. The tale of the eloquent peasant explores justice, order, and the power of eloquence through the story of a peasant who, having been unfairly treated, pleads his case to officials. These works of wisdom literature reflect the Middle Kingdom Egyptians' concern for social reality and their pursuit of an ideal order. While stabilizing internal affairs, the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom also actively expanded Egypt's influence abroad. Nubia to the south, with its rich resources of gold, ivory, ebony, and its strategic position as a trade route to the African interior, became Egypt's primary target for expansion. Pharaohs such as Senusret I and Senusret III launched multiple expeditions into Nubia. They did not merely conduct predatory raids, but built a series of strong fortresses in the Nubian region, such as Buhan and Mergissa. These fortresses formed Egypt's military and administrative outposts in Nubia, effectively controlling local resources and trade routes, and pushing Egypt's southern border near the Second Cataract of the Nile. These military campaigns not only brought great wealth to Egypt, but also demonstrated the powerful military capabilities and state organizational skills of the Middle Kingdom pharaohs. Inscriptions on stelae within these fortresses contain the pharaohs' grand pronouncements, declaring their conquest and rule over Nubia. However, this conquest was not without its challenges. Nubian resistance was frequent, and Egypt needed to continuously deploy military forces to maintain its rule in the south. Compared to the aloof and sacrosanct image of the pharaohs in the Old Kingdom, the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom, to some extent, displayed a more approachable and concerned side. This may be related to the traumatic experiences of the first intermediate period, where pharaohs deeply understood the importance of popular support and realized their own responsibilities and pressures. In some literary works and sculptures, the pharaohs are no longer merely perfect, idealized divine incarnations, but display a more complex and humanized aspect. For example, some statues of Senusret III have solemn faces, bearing a hint of melancholy and weariness, as if carrying the heavy burden of the state and deep thoughts about the future. This shift towards a more realistic, style suggests a subtle change in the concept of kingship. Pharaohs also paid more attention to their image as shepherds, emphasizing themselves as the protectors of the people and guarantors of their well-being. They strived to restore social order, develop agricultural production, and address the hardships of the populace. This shift in perspective contributed to the Middle Kingdom's rule having, to some extent, greater cohesion and centrality. The Middle Kingdom's resurgence was a significant turning point for ancient Egyptian civilization. Building on the traditions of the Old Kingdom, it incorporated a new spirit of the age, displaying more mature and profound civilizational characteristics. The flourishing of literature, artistic innovation, the evolution of divine authority, and the expansion into frontiers collectively formed the glorious tapestry of this era. However, as is the cycle of history, prosperity often conceals underlying crises. As the Middle Kingdom entered its later stages, some unsettling factors re-emerged, and a shadow of foreigners from outside was about to loom over the Nile. Egypt's destiny would once again face new challenges. As the glory of the Middle Kingdom era gradually faded, and as the pharaoh's scepter began to appear less stable, a shadow from the northeast quietly spread towards the Nile Delta. They were not traditional enemies, nor did their arrival come through a direct war of conquest. They were foreign rulers, and their infiltration and eventual seizure of power plunged Egypt into a period of chaos and humiliation lasting over a century. This was the Second Intermediate Period, approximately 1650 BCE, 1550 BCE, and the most prominent figures in this history. The Hyksos. The name Hyksos derives from the Egyptian Sheikh Hajas Bambuti, meaning rulers of foreign lands or rulers of the desert regions. They were not a single ethnic group, but rather a mixed collection of Semitic-speaking tribes from the Syria-Palestine region. Historians are still exploring their exact origins, but it is certain that they were not sudden conquerors who appeared out of nowhere. In the late Middle Kingdom, with the weakening of the Egyptian central government's control and the relaxation of northeastern border defenses, some Asiatic tribes began to gradually migrate and settle peacefully in the eastern Nile Delta region. They might have been merchants, artisans, pastoralists, or even mercenaries, attracted by Egypt's prosperity. Initially, this migration might not have caused sufficient alarm among Egyptian rulers, and to some extent, it even contributed to the economic development and cultural exchange in the Delta region. However, as time went on, the number of these foreign immigrants continually increased, and they formed a relatively independent community in the Eastern Delta, possessing their own culture and customs. When Egypt's internal conflicts intensified and the pharaoh's authority further declined, these Hyksos seized the opportunity, gradually gained control of local governments, and eventually established their own center of rule in the Delta, Avaris. The Hyksos' ability to gain a foothold in Egypt and ultimately dominate the region, besides Egypt's own decline, was primarily due to the more advanced military technology they brought. Among the most revolutionary were the horse-drawn chariot and the composite bow. Before this, the Egyptian army was primarily composed of infantry, with relatively traditional weaponry. In contrast, the horse-drawn chariots brought by the Hyksos gained an absolute advantage on the battlefield due to their high speed and powerful impact. Chariot warriors could rapidly maneuver, shoot arrows, or hurl javelins, inflicting devastating damage on traditional Egyptian infantry formations. This was a completely new method of warfare, and the Egyptians were caught off guard. The composite bow was another potent weapon that left the Egyptian army far behind. Compared to Egypt's traditional self-bows, the composite bow, made of laminated materials, such as wood, horn, and sinew, had greater elasticity and range, as well as stronger penetrating power. Archers equipped with composite bows could inflict effective damage on enemies from a greater distance. In addition to chariots and composite bows, the Hyksos may have also introduced other military equipment and tactics, such as more advanced bronze weapons like the Khopesh scimitar and armor. These military advantages allowed the Hyksos to gradually encroach upon Egyptian territory and push the native Egyptian pharaonic regime back to the region around Thebes. Hyksos ruled primarily concentrated in Lower Egypt and parts of Middle Egypt. They established their own dynasty in Avaris, commonly known as the 15th dynasty, and attempted to emulate the Egyptian pharaonic style of rule, adopting Egyptian titles and bureaucratic systems, and even worshipping some Egyptian deities, especially the storm god Seth, whom they believed resembled their homeland deities. However, for the proud Egyptians, being ruled by vile Asiatics was an unbearable humiliation. In the south, the native Egyptian regime centered in Thebes, the 17th dynasty, still existed. Although they were militarily at a disadvantage and forced to pay tribute to the Hyksos, they never abandoned their hope of resistance and restoration. During this period, Egyptian national consciousness was unprecedentedly aroused. The rulers of Thebes, on one hand, endured humiliation and accumulated strength. On the other hand, they actively learned and absorbed the advanced military technology of the Hyksos, beginning to form their own chariot corps and improve their weaponry. Priests in the temples, through various religious rituals and oracles, boosted the morale of the people and proclaimed the legitimacy of expelling the foreigners. Regarding the specific circumstances of Hyksos rule, due to the relative scarcity of their own cultural records, we largely rely on later Egyptian documents. These documents often carry a strong nationalist bias, portraying the Hyksos as brutal, godless barbarians. While such descriptions may be biased, they also reflect the widespread abhorrence and sense of humiliation among Egyptians during this period of foreign rule. After long humiliation and resistance, the trumpet of counterattack finally sounded in Thebes. Pharaoh Seqenenretau at the end of the 17th dynasty, judging by the wounds on his mummy, was likely killed in battle with the Hyksos, his sacrifice further fueling the Egyptians' desire for revenge. His son Kamosi inherited the throne and launched a large-scale offensive against the Hyksos. Kamosi left behind important stelae, documenting his determination to march north and his initial victories. He declared, "I am resolved to save Egypt, to strike down the Asiatics. I shall let the Asiatics know my might." His army even reached the vicinity of Avaris, the Hyksos capital. Although he could not capture it in a single stroke, he greatly boosted Egyptian morale and laid the foundation for the ultimate victory. Kamosi died young, and the heavy task of expelling the foreigners fell upon his brother or son, Ahmose the Firm. Ahmose was a military commander of even greater ambition and strategy. He inherited his brother's will, diligently worked to strengthen his army, and utilizing newly acquired military technologies like chariots and composite bows, launched continuous and fierce attacks on the Hyksos. This war of expulsion was full of hardship and sacrifice. Under Ahmose's leadership, the Egyptian army, after a long siege and fierce fighting, finally captured Avaris, the Hyksos capital. The remaining Hyksos forces were completely expelled from Egypt, fleeing back to the Palestine region. Ahmose pursued the victory, taking the war into Asia and further solidifying Egypt's border defenses. With the expulsion of the Hyksos, the century-long Second Intermediate Period came to an end. Egypt, having endured foreign oppression and national struggle, was reborn from the ashes. Ahmose, this great expeller, not only restored Egypt's independence and unity, but also ushered in a new, even more glorious era, the New Kingdom period. This history, overshadowed by foreign rule, profoundly influenced the Egyptian national psyche and foreign policy, making them attach greater importance to national defense and fostering the ambition to build a powerful empire. The waters of the Nile, washing away humiliation, also nurtured new glory. As Ahmose's chariots rolled over the ruins of Avaris, and as the shadow of the Hyksos was completely dispelled, a new, even more dazzling sun rose over the Nile Valley. Egypt, having endured the humiliation and struggle of the Second Intermediate Period, not only regained its independence and unity, but also burst forth with unprecedented vitality and ambition. A new era, the New Kingdom period, approximately 1550 BCE, 1070 BCE, thus began. This was not merely a change of dynasty, but the birth of an empire. Egypt would no longer be satisfied with just the fertile lands along the Nile. Its gaze now turned towards a wider world. Ahmose I, the hero who liberated Egypt from foreign rule, naturally became the founder of the new dynasty. The 18th dynasty he initiated would become one of the most powerful and glorious dynasties in ancient Egyptian history. Ahmose's achievements were not limited to expelling the Hyksos, but also lay in his laying a solid political, military, and administrative foundation for the establishment of the new kingdom. He first dedicated himself to consolidating domestic unity and stability. He took decisive measures to eliminate local forces that had supported the Hyksos or attempted to remain independent during the Second Intermediate Period. He strengthened central authority, restoring the pharaoh's supreme power. In terms of administration, he reappointed loyal officials and restored the effective functioning of the state apparatus. Military innovation was another important aspect of Ahmose's reign. In the war against the Hyksos, Egyptians deeply recognized the importance of advanced military technology. Ahmose vigorously developed a standing army, transforming it into a well-equipped, well-trained professional military force. Chariot troops became the core of the army, and new weapons such as composite bows, bronze swords, and armor were widely adopted. This powerful army was not only a guarantee of domestic stability, but also a sharp tool for Egypt's external expansion. Ahmose also focused on restoring temples and cities damaged during the war, re-establishing the worship of traditional deities, especially the chief god of Thebes, Amun-Ra. By attributing his victory to divine favor, he further strengthened the legitimacy of royal power. His queen, Ahmose Nefertari, also played an important role, being revered as God's wife of Amun, holding significant influence in religious and political life. Ahmose's reign laid a solid foundation for the rise of the new kingdom. Like a phoenix reborn from ashes, he led Egypt's resurgence and equipped it with wings to soar towards imperial glory. After Ahmose I, the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty inherited and expanded his ambitions, spreading Egypt's prestige far and wide. Among them, several pharaohs of the Thutmose family, with their outstanding military talents and achievements in expanding territory, extended Egypt's borders to an unprecedented degree. Thutmose I was the first pharaoh to launch large-scale expeditions deep into Inner Asia and Nubia. He led the Egyptian army northward, crossing the Sinai Peninsula, penetrating into the Syria-Palestine region, and even reaching the Euphrates River, where he erected Egypt's boundary stele. To the south, he further extended Egypt's sphere of influence near the Fourth Cataract of the Nile, effectively controlling the gold-producing areas and trade routes there. Thutmose I's expeditions marked Egypt's transformation from a regional kingdom into a true empire. His grandson, Thutmose III, was hailed as the Napoleon of Egypt and is one of the greatest military commanders in ancient Egyptian history. In the early part of his reign, his aunt and stepmother, Queen Hatshepsut, held real power. But after Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III ruled independently and immediately demonstrated his extraordinary military genius. During his reign of several decades, Thutmose III launched at least 17 major military campaigns, primarily against various city-state alliances in the Syria-Palestine region. The famous Battle of Megiddo was the opening chapter of his glorious military career. He defeated the Allied forces led by the King of Kadesh with unexpected tactics, laying the foundation for Egypt's control over the region. His army, well-equipped, disciplined, and tactically flexible, was almost invincible. Under his rule, Egypt's sphere of influence reached its zenith. Other pharaohs of the Thutmoside family, such as Amenhotep II, also inherited the martial tradition, continuing to consolidate and expand Egyptian rule in Asia and Nubia. These conquerors, through one military victory after another, spread Egypt's fame throughout the ancient Near Eastern world. During the New Kingdom, especially during the heyday of the 18th dynasty, Egypt established a vast empire spanning West Asia and North Africa. To the north, Egypt's sphere of influence extended to northern Syria, controlling many important city-states and trade routes in the Levant region, the eastern Mediterranean coast. The rulers of these regions, although nominally retaining some autonomy, in practice had to pay tribute to the Egyptian pharaoh and accept supervision by Egyptian garrisons. Egypt effectively controlled the local political and economic lifelines by establishing administrative officials and military outposts in these areas. To the south, Egypt's rule over Nubia was more direct and stable. Nubia was treated as an Egyptian province directly governed by an Egyptian viceroy. Egypt built numerous temples, fortresses, and cities in Nubia, promoted Egyptian culture and religion, and continuously transported Nubia's rich resources back to Egypt proper. Nubian gold was a crucial economic pillar supporting the operation of the Egyptian empire. To the west, Egypt also exerted influence over tribes in the Libyan desert, ensuring the tranquility of the western border. Trade on the Mediterranean Sea also flourished, and Egypt established connections with the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations in the Aegean region. This vast empire was not merely the result of military conquest, but also relied on a relatively mature system of administration. Egypt maintained its rule over conquered territories through various means, including diplomacy, marriage alliances, hostage systems, and economic control. The establishment of the empire brought Egypt unprecedented wealth, prestige, and cultural influence. The expansion of the empire brought enormous economic benefits to Egypt. Cedar wood, wine, olive oil, metals, and slaves from the Syria-Palestine region, gold, ivory, ebony, spices, and exotic animals from Nubia, and livestock and leather from Libya flowed into Egypt like a tide. Much of this wealth was concentrated in the hands of the pharaoh, the royal family, the nobility, and the temples. The pharaoh used this wealth to support the vast army and bureaucracy, build more magnificent temples and tombs, and reward meritorious subjects. The Temple of Amun at Thebes, as the empire's main temple, received vast amounts of land and tribute, becoming one of Egypt's wealthiest institutions. Large gold reserves allowed Egypt to dominate international trade in the ancient Near East. Pharaohs could use gold to procure necessary goods from other countries or as diplomatic gifts to maintain friendly relations with other powerful states. In the famous Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence between Egyptian pharaohs and rulers of Near Eastern countries, we can see the desire of various monarchs for Egyptian gold. The influx of wealth also stimulated the development of Egyptian craftsmanship and art. Artisans used precious materials from various regions to create even more exquisite artifacts, jewelry, and furniture. The decoration of temples and palaces also became more luxurious and magnificent. The entire Egyptian society was immersed in the prosperity and confidence brought by the empire. The glory of the new kingdom was built upon powerful military strength, effective state administration, and abundant material wealth. Egypt transformed from an insular river valley civilization into an actively expanding empire. Its army was invincible, its culture had far-reaching influence, and its wealth was enviable. However, maintaining the empire also required immense costs, and internal conflicts and external challenges never ceased. After reaching the peak of its glory, what new changes would Egypt face? An unconventional queen, a shocking religious revolution, and a gold-covered boy pharaoh were about to step onto the stage of history, adding more legend and mystery to this great imperial era. On the male-dominated political stage of ancient Egypt, women typically played the roles of queen, queen mother, or temple priestess. They held esteemed positions but rarely directly wielded supreme power. However, during the height of the 18th dynasty, a woman named Hatshepsut, with her extraordinary wisdom, firm will, and unique political acumen, broke this convention, successfully crowned herself pharaoh, becoming one of the most famous and controversial female rulers in ancient Egyptian history. Her reign was not characterized by military triumphs, but by peace, prosperity, and astonishing architectural achievements, leaving an indelible mark on Egyptian history. Hatshepsut was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I, possessing pure royal blood. She married her half-brother Thutmose II, becoming queen. Thutmose II was sickly and had a short reign. Upon his death, his son by a secondary wife, Thutmose III, was still a child. According to custom, Hatshepsut, as queen and stepmother, became the regent for the young pharaoh. Initially, Hatshepsut may have merely managed state affairs in her capacity as regent. However, this ambitious woman was clearly not content with merely being a power behind the throne. She skillfully leveraged her royal lineage, religious influence, and the support of a loyal faction of officials to gradually consolidate and expand her power. Around the 7th year of her regency, Hatshepsut made an astonishing decision. She formally declared herself pharaoh, ruling jointly with the young Thutmose III, but effectively holding supreme power. To legitimize her rule, she undertook a series of carefully planned propaganda campaigns. She claimed to be the daughter of Amun, stating that Amun himself had descended and transformed into her father Thutmose I, uniting with her mother Queen Ahmose, thereby giving birth to her as the divinely chosen ruler. This divine birth propaganda greatly reinforced the sanctity and legitimacy of her rule. In her statues and reliefs, Hatshepsut progressively adopted masculine features. She wore the pharaoh's double crown, dressed in male attire, and even affixed a false beard, symbolizing pharaonic authority, to her chin. This deliberate masculinization was not to deny her female identity, but to conform to the traditional image of a pharaoh within a male-dominated power system in order to gain wider acceptance. Her name was also inscribed within cartouches, enjoying the same honors as other male pharaohs. Unlike many of her male predecessors and successors, Hatshepsut's reign was not primarily characterized by large-scale military conquests. Although she did send troops on some small-scale military operations to maintain border security, her main efforts were more focused on domestic construction, economic development, and peaceful diplomacy. One of the most remarkable achievements of her reign was the dispatch of a large fleet of ships on a long voyage to the mysterious land of Punt. The exact geographical location of Punt remains debated, but most scholars believe it was located in present-day Somalia, Eritrea, or the southern coastal regions of the Arabian Peninsula. The purpose of this voyage was not military conquest but peaceful trade. On the walls of Hatshepsut's magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, on the west bank of Thebes, the splendor of this expedition is vividly depicted. Egyptian ships laden with various goods such as beer, wine, weapons, and jewelry sailed to Punt. There, they were warmly welcomed by the chief and people of Punt. The Egyptians exchanged their goods for various precious commodities produced in Punt, including large quantities of myrrh, frankincense, used for incense and religious offerings, ebony, ivory, gold, leopard skins, as well as live incense trees and exotic animals such as baboons and giraffes. The fleet returned fully loaded, bringing immense wealth and exotic treasures to Egypt. Hatshepsut regarded this successful voyage as a major achievement of her reign and attributed it to the guidance of Amun. This Punt expedition not only promoted trade between Egypt and distant regions, but also demonstrated Egypt's powerful seafaring capabilities and the achievements of peaceful diplomacy during Hatshepsut's time. And Hatshepsut was a great builder, and during her reign, numerous temples and monumental structures were built throughout Egypt. Among these, the most representative of her architectural achievements and personal style is undoubtedly the Temple of Deir el-Bahari, nestled at the foot of the cliffs on the west bank of Thebes. This temple was designed and supervised by Senenmut, Hatshepsut's favored architect. It adopted a unique three-tiered terrace structure, perfectly integrated with the surrounding natural mountain landscape, appearing solemn and elegant. Wide ramps connected the various platforms, which were lined with neat colonnades. The temple walls are adorned with a wealth of exquisite reliefs and inscriptions, documenting Hatshepsut's life story, the legend of her divine birth, the splendor of the Punt expedition, and offerings to Amun and other deities. The Temple of Deir el-Bahari was not merely Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. Her tomb was actually in the Valley of the Kings, but also a mansion of millions of years commemorating her achievements and proclaiming the legitimacy of her rule. With its bold, innovative design, magnificent scale, and exquisite artistic decorations, it stands as one of the masterpieces of ancient Egyptian architecture, still breathtaking to this day. In addition to Deir el-Bahari, Hatshepsut undertook large-scale expansions at Karnak Temple, erected the tallest obelisk in Egyptian history, and restored and built many temples throughout Egypt to demonstrate her piety towards the gods and her contributions to the state. Hatshepsut ruled Egypt for over 20 years, a period during which Egyptian society was relatively stable, the economy prospered, and culture and art achieved significant advancements. However, after her death, roughly in the late period of her nominal co-ruler Thutmose III's independent reign, a campaign to erase her memory began. Throughout temples and monuments across Egypt, Hatshepsut's name and image were systematically chiseled out or replaced with the names of Thutmose the Ferns, Thutmose Teku, or Thutmose III. Her statues were toppled, smashed and buried. It seemed someone was attempting to completely erase this female pharaoh from history. The reason for this memory erasure remains a focal point of debate among historians. One common view is that it was an action taken by Thutmose III to consolidate his power and eliminate Hatshepsut, the former female pharaoh, as a potential threat to the legitimacy of his rule. He may have believed that female rule was contrary to Egyptian tradition, or held resentment over Hatshepsut's long actual power during his youth. Another perspective suggests that this erasure was not due to personal animosity, but rather a necessity to maintain traditional order. In Egyptian thought, the pharaoh was meant to be male. Female rule was considered an abnormal state. To restore Ma'at, cosmic order, it was deemed necessary to rectify this abnormal period of history. Regardless of the reason, this memory erasure caused Hatshepsut's name to remain silent in the river of history for millennia, until modern archaeological excavations brought this extraordinary queen back to light. Her story, full of power struggles, gender challenges, and the pursuit of immortality, reveals a unique and fascinating side of ancient Egyptian history. Her peaceful rise and brilliant achievements prove that women can also play significant roles and leave profound imprints on the stage of history. However, the capriciousness of history also reminds us that even powerful rulers may face the fate of their legacy being altered after their death. Following Akhenaten's tumultuous, yet ultimately silenced, religious revolution, the stage of Egyptian history seemed to temporarily regain its calm. However, a young pharaoh, with his brief reign and a staggering discovery thousands of years after his death, once again focused the world's attention on the banks of the Nile. He did not become famous for great military feats or astonishing achievements, but because of the dazzling golden treasures in his tomb and the various bizarre legends surrounding its discovery, he became one of the most widely known symbols of ancient Egypt. He was Tutankhamun, the golden pharaoh who slept for over 3 millennia, and finally reappeared to the world in a blaze of gold. Amenhotep IV was the son of the famous Sun King, Amenhotep III. During his father's reign, Egypt was powerful, culturally prosperous, and the worship of the sun god Amun-Ra reached its zenith. However, when the young Amenhotep IV inherited the throne, he gradually exhibited distinct religious leanings. He began to revere Aten, a form of the sun god that was previously not prominent in the Egyptian pantheon. Aten was typically depicted as a sun disk with numerous rays extending from its ends, symbolizing the sun god bestowing life and blessings upon all creation. In Amenhotep IV's view, Aten was not merely one of many deities but the sole supreme god of the cosmos. He believed that only Aten was the true creator and master of the universe, and all other traditional deities, including the once prominent Amun, were mere false idols. This exclusive worship of Aten, in ancient Egypt where polytheism was deeply entrenched, was undoubtedly a subversive, heretical idea. Amenhotep IV gradually pushed his beliefs to the extreme. Around the 5th year of his reign, he made a startling decision. He changed his name from Amenhotep, meaning Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, meaning effective for Aten, or servant of Aten. This name change publicly declared his break with the traditional Amun cult and his complete conversion to the sole worship of Aten. He began to promote the worship of Aten throughout the country. He ordered the closure of temples dedicated to other deities. Especially the temple of Amun in Thebes halted their rituals and attempted to erase the name and image of Amun. The spearhead of this religious reform was directed at the traditional sacerdotal system centered around Amun, particularly the powerful Amun priesthood. To completely break free from the influence of traditional forces in Thebes and establish a pure center for the new Aten worship, Akhenaten made another bold move. He moved the capital. He chose a new capital site in a pristine area of central Egypt, untouched by any deity, and named it Akhetaten, meaning Horizon of Aten, which is present-day Amarna. Akhenaten built the new capital at Amarna with astonishing speed. The city was planned entirely according to the Aten faith, lacking the dark mystery of traditional temples. Instead, it featured open courtyards and altars, allowing direct reception of Aten's, the sun's rays. Palaces, temples, officials' residences, and residential areas sprang up, with Akhenaten, his queen Nefertiti, and their daughters forming the core of this new capital. In Amarna, Akhenaten and Nefertiti were regarded as the sole intermediaries of Aten on earth, the only bridge between the people and the divine. They often rode chariots parading through the city streets, receiving the adoration of the populace. This practice of placing the royal family at the core of religious belief was also a significant characteristic of the Aten cult. Nefertiti, known for her stunning beauty and important role in religious activities, whose name means the beautiful one has come, was a staunch supporter and key participant in Akhenaten's religious revolution. Amarna quickly became a vibrant and innovative city, attracting many officials, artists, and craftsmen who followed the new faith. However, this utopian city, built on idealism, also harbored crises. It was out of step with the broader traditional Egyptian society, and its radical religious policies inevitably faced strong resistance from traditional forces. Akhenaten's religious revolution not only impacted religious beliefs but also profoundly influenced the artistic style of the time. To distinguish itself from traditional, conventional artistic expressions, a completely new art form known as the Amarna style emerged. The most prominent feature of the Amarna style is its unprecedented realism and naturalism. Traditional Egyptian art often pursued idealization and timelessness, with pharaohs and deities typically depicted as young, athletic, and stiff-posed. However, in Amarna art, Akhenaten and his family members were depicted with unique, even somewhat exaggerated physical features: elongated skulls, slender necks, drooping bellies, full hips, and slender limbs. Whether this peculiar imagery is a realistic portrayal of their actual appearance or an expression of some religious symbolism remains a topic of scholarly discussion. In addition to the uniqueness of human figures, Amarna art was also full of life and emotional expression. In reliefs and paintings, we often see intimate scenes of Akhenaten and Nefertiti with their daughters, worshipping Aten together, dining together, and even embracing and kissing each other. Such depictions of family warmth and daily life were extremely rare in the previously solemn and dignified Egyptian art. Artists also paid more attention to the meticulous depiction of natural scenery, such as flowers, trees, and flying birds under the sun, and playful animals all full of vitality. This focus on the real world and emphasis on individual characteristics made Amarna art unique in the history of ancient Egyptian art, demonstrating a brief but dazzling innovative brilliance. Although Akhenaten, with his powerful pharaonic authority, forcefully propagated the Aten cult for a period, this radical religious reform faced immense resistance from the very beginning. First, it touched upon deeply ingrained traditional beliefs. Egypt's polytheistic system had persisted for thousands of years, permeating every aspect of social life, and had long been an inseparable part of the Egyptians' spiritual world. To suddenly abandon all old gods and worship only an abstract Aten, without a concrete form, was difficult for ordinary people to accept. Second, it severely harmed the interests of the Amun priesthood. The Temple of Amun was one of the wealthiest and most powerful institutions in Egypt, and the Amun priests wielded immense wealth and influence. Akhenaten's reforms were undoubtedly aimed at stripping them of their power and status, which inevitably led to their strong opposition and covert resistance. Furthermore, Akhenaten's focus on religious reform might have, to some extent, led him to neglect other imperial affairs, resulting in a weakening of control over frontier regions. In the Amarna letters, we see some of Egypt's vassal states in Asia requesting aid from the pharaoh, but seemingly not receiving a timely response. Akhenaten ruled for about 17 years. After his death, the Aten cult he promoted rapidly collapsed. His successors, including the famous Tutankhamun, originally Tutankhaten, under strong pressure from traditional forces, were compelled to abandon the Aten cult and restore the worship of Amun and other traditional deities. The city of Amarna was abandoned, and Akhenaten's name and image were systematically erased by his successors. He was branded a heretic pharaoh. Akhenaten's religious revolution, like a meteor streaking across the night sky, though brief, left a profound mark. It challenged tradition, spurred innovation, and caused immense social upheaval. It shows us the clash between individual will and the torrent of history, as well as the difficulty and complexity of religious change. Although this revolution ultimately failed, the monotheistic ideas it put forth and the artistic breakthroughs it brought about had some influence on later generations, becoming a thought-provoking and unique chapter in ancient Egyptian history. After Akhenaten, Egypt would return to tradition, but the gears of history had quietly turned to the next enigmatic focus. After Akhenaten's dramatic but ultimately silenced religious revolution, the stage of Egyptian history seemed to temporarily return to calm. However, a young pharaoh with his short reign and a breathtaking discovery thousands of years after his death once again drew the world's attention to the banks of the Nile. He did not achieve fame through great military exploits or astonishing accomplishments, but because of the dazzling golden treasures in his tomb and the various strange legends surrounding its discovery, he became one of the most widely known symbols of ancient Egypt. He was Tutankhamun, the golden pharaoh who had slept for over 3 millennia and finally reappeared to the world in a golden glow. Tutankhamun, originally named Tutankhaten, meaning living image of Aten, indicating that he was born during Akhenaten's promotion of the Aten cult and was very likely Akhenaten's son or a close relative. He ascended to the throne at around 9 years old, becoming the ruler of Egypt. In the early years of his reign, real power in Egypt was likely held by senior officials such as the Grand Vizier I and General Horemheb. It was under the influence of these traditional forces that the young pharaoh made a crucial decision to abandon the Aten monotheistic cult promoted by his father and restore the worship of Amun and other traditional deities. He changed his name from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, meaning living image of Amun, and moved the capital back from Amarna to the traditional political center Memphis, while also restoring Thebes' status as a religious center. This move marked the complete end of Akhenaten's religious reform and the return of Egyptian society to traditional order. Tutankhamun ordered the repair of temples damaged during Akhenaten's time, restored the status and power of the priests, and sought to heal the social rifts caused by the religious reform. In the restoration stele promulgated during his reign, the chaotic state of Egypt during Akhenaten's time and his efforts to restore order were detailed. However, the reign of this young pharaoh did not last long. Tutankhamun died young at around 19 years old. The cause of his death remains a subject of speculation, with theories ranging from accidental death, illness, to even murder, and it is still a topic of research and debate among historians and scientists today. His brief reign seemed to leave behind few earth-shattering achievements, but fate had arranged for him a more legendary afterlife. For millennia after Tutankhamun's death, his name and tomb, like those of many other pharaohs, gradually became covered by yellow sand and forgotten by the world. Although the Valley of the Kings, the primary burial ground for New Kingdom pharaohs, had been repeatedly excavated by archaeologists, and many famous pharaohs' tombs, such as those of Ramesses II and Seti I, had come to light. They had all, without exception, been severely plundered by ancient tomb robbers, leaving only empty chambers and exquisite frescoes. However, the British archaeologist Howard Carter firmly believed that somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, an undiscovered, intact pharaoh's tomb was still hidden. With the financial backing of the British nobleman Lord Carnarvon, Carter conducted a painstaking search in the Valley of the Kings for several years. Time and again, disappointments almost led Lord Carnarvon to lose patience and withdraw his funding. It was at this critical moment, on November 4, 1922, that a moment that would change archaeological history arrived. Carter's team discovered a stairway leading underground, beneath the tomb of Ramesses VI. As they cleared the stairway and reached a sealed door, the seals on the door were still intact, clearly bearing the imprint of Anubis, the jackal god representing the royal necropolis and 9 captives, as well as a less well-known cartouche, Tutankhamun. Carter suppressed his excitement, chiseled a small hole in the door and peered inside with a candle. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, the sight before him stunned him. He wrote in his diary, "At first I could see nothing, the hot air escaping from the chamber causing the candle flame to flicker, but presently, as my eyes grew accustomed to the light, details of the room emerged slowly from the mist. Strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere the glint of gold. This discovery shocked the entire world. A pharaoh's tomb, almost untouched by plunderers after sleeping for over 3 millennia, finally revealed its mysterious and brilliant face to the world. Tutankhamun's tomb, numbered KV62, though small in scale and relatively simple in structure, was nevertheless filled with an astonishing number, variety, and exquisite quality of grave goods, totaling over 5,000 items. These treasures showcase the pinnacle of artistic achievement and luxurious court life during the New Kingdom period of ancient Egypt. The most breathtaking, without a doubt, is the golden mask covering Tutankhamun's mummy. This mask, crafted from pure gold, weighs 11 kilograms and is inlaid with precious stones such as lapis lazuli and turquoise. The pharaoh's face is serene and majestic, his eyes gazing into eternity. It is not only an exquisitely beautiful work of art, but also a symbol of the sacred status of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh. In addition to the golden mask, the tomb also contained nested golden anthropoid coffins, with the innermost coffin made of pure gold, weighing 4 kilograms. Furthermore, there were golden chariots, a golden throne, golden ceremonial chairs, jewel-encrusted ornaments, exquisite alabaster vessels, various weapons, musical instruments, gaming boards, clothing, and even food and drinks consumed by the pharaoh during his lifetime. These treasures are not merely a pile of wealth. They contain rich historical and cultural information. They reflect the highly skilled craftsmanship of the time and demonstrate the ancient Egyptians' religious beliefs, burial customs, and aesthetic tastes. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb provided immeasurable valuable data for the study of the New Kingdom period's history, art, and culture, and captivated the entire world with the dazzling brilliance of ancient Egyptian civilization. Accompanying the astonishing discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, an even more sensational legend began to spread rapidly: the Pharaoh's Curse. It was said that an inscription at the entrance to the tomb read, "Death will come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." In the years following the tomb's excavation, some people involved in the excavation or who had contact with the tomb died successively for various reasons, including the financier Lord Carnarvon, who died from sepsis caused by an infected mosquito bite. This fueled the Pharaoh's curse narrative, which was widely exaggerated by the media, adding a mysterious and terrifying layer to Tutankhamun's discovery. However, scientific investigations and statistical analyses have shown that there is no conclusive evidence to support the so-called Pharaoh's curse. The average lifespan of individuals involved in the tomb's excavation did not significantly differ from that of other populations of the same age group during the same period. Some deaths can be explained by the limitations of medical conditions at the time, tropical diseases, or pure coincidence, or potentially harmful microorganisms or toxic substances present in the tomb might also have contributed to some health issues. Nevertheless, the legend of the Pharaoh's curse continues to be widely circulated among the public, becoming an indispensable element of Tutankhamun's story. It satisfies people's imagination of ancient mystical powers and adds more legendary color to the tomb of this boy pharaoh. Tutankhamun, this young pharaoh with a short reign and unextraordinary deeds during his lifetime, has become one of the most dazzling stars of ancient Egyptian civilization, due to the intact preservation and astonishing discovery of his tomb. His golden mask has become a symbol of ancient Egypt, and his treasures have allowed the world to appreciate the splendor of the Nile. His story, a blend of historical truth and legendary mystery, continues to attract people to explore and interpret. After the golden glow of Tutankhamun, Egyptian history would welcome a ruler of greater ambition and power, who would leave an immortal mark on the banks of the Nile with his magnificent constructions and long reign. After the golden glow of Tutankhamun gradually faded into the river of history, the stage of Egyptian power welcomed a ruler of greater ambition, greater boldness, and a deeper understanding of how to use the art of propaganda to shape his own immortal image. He was Ramesses II, also revered as Ramesses the Great. During his long reign of over 60 years, approximately 1279 BCE, 1213 BCE, Egypt's prestige spread far and wide, temples proliferated, and his name and statues were found everywhere, on both banks of the Nile, as if to imprint his personal mark on all of Egypt. He was a great warrior, a tireless builder, and a master propagandist who deeply understood the deification of kingship. Ramesses II was from the 19th dynasty, and his father, Seti I, was a valiant pharaoh who had restored Egypt's international influence, which had weakened during the Amarna period. Ramesses II received rigorous military and political training from a young age, and participated in state affairs and military campaigns early in his life. He ascended to the throne at around 25 years old, beginning his long and glorious reign. He lived to an advanced age of over 90 years, ruling Egypt for 67 years, making him one of the longest reigning pharaohs in ancient Egyptian history. Such a long reign provided him with ample time and space to realize his grand ambitions. He was energetic and ambitious, eager to surpass all his predecessors and leave the most profound mark on Egyptian history. Ramesses II was not only a powerful ruler, but also a prolific father. Records indicate he had numerous wives and concubines, and over 100 children, which to some extent ensured the continuation of the royal line, but also laid hidden dangers for later succession issues. His most famous queen was Nefertari, whose beauty and wisdom were deeply cherished by the pharaoh. Ramesses II built magnificent tombs and temples for her. In the early years of Ramesses II's reign, he faced a challenge from a powerful northern adversary, the Hittite Empire. The Hittites controlled most of northern Syria, posing a serious threat to Egypt's sphere of influence in West Asia. To contend for control over the Syrian region, Rameses II launched the famous Battle of Kadesh. This battle took place in the fifth year of his reign, near the city of Kadesh on the Orontes River in present-day Syria. Rameses II personally led the large Egyptian army northward, intending to decisively defeat the Hittite army and reclaim Kadesh. However, the Hittite king Muwatalli II also assembled a large force and set up a clever ambush. According to Egyptian records, mainly from temple reliefs and inscriptions, during the army's march due to intelligence errors and command mismanagement, the Egyptian army was at one point surrounded by the Hittite forces, and Rameses II himself was in great peril. In a critical moment, Rameses II displayed extraordinary courage and divine power, allegedly aided by Amun, personally leading his bodyguard in a charge, ultimately repelling the Hittite attack and successfully breaking through the encirclement. However, Hittite records tell a different story, also claiming victory for themselves. In fact, the Battle of Kadesh was likely a fierce war of attrition with no clear victor. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, but failed to completely annihilate the other's main forces. Nevertheless, Rameses II heavily propagandized the Battle of Kadesh as his personal great victory. On the walls of temples throughout Egypt, grand scenes depicting his heroic fighting and turning the tide were carved. This propaganda greatly enhanced his prestige domestically and consolidated his rule. After the Battle of Kadesh, conflicts between Egypt and the Hittites continued. Finally, in approximately the 21st year of Rameses II's reign, both sides signed the earliest known international peace treaty in history, the Silver Treaty. This treaty stipulated a cessation of hostilities, defined spheres of influence, and established a military alliance. To solidify the treaty, Rameses II also married a Hittite princess. The signing of this treaty brought decades of peace to Egypt and the Hittites and marked a new phase in international relations in the ancient Near East. Rameses II was a tireless building enthusiast. During his reign, numerous temples, palaces, and monumental structures were built and expanded throughout Egypt. He seemed to have a strong desire to engrave his name and image permanently on the land of Egypt. Among his many constructions, the most breathtaking is undoubtedly the Abu Simbel Temple, located on the west bank of the Nile in Nubia. This temple was not built by stacking stone blocks, but was carved directly into the rock face of the mountain. The facade of the Great Temple features 4 colossal seated statues of Rameses II, each 20 meters tall, gazing majestically eastward, symbolizing the pharaoh's divinity and eternity. The temple entrance leads to a hypostyle hall adorned with more statues of Rameses II, and its walls are covered with scenes depicting his victories over enemies and offerings to deities. The design of the Great Temple is incredibly ingenious. On 2 specific days each year, believed to be Rameses II's birthday and coronation day, the rising sun's rays would penetrate the temple's entrance and long passageway, directly illuminating the statues of the gods in the innermost sanctuary, Ta, Amun-Ra, Ramesses II himself, and Ra-Horakhti, with only Ta, the god of the underworld, remaining perpetually in darkness. This perfect blend of astronomy and architecture is truly astonishing. Next to the Great Temple, Rameses II also built a smaller temple for his favorite queen, Nefertari, dedicated to the goddess Hathor and the deified Nefertari. The facade of this smaller temple also features standing statues of Rameses II and Nefertari, and though smaller than the Great Temple, it is equally exquisite. The construction of the Abu symbol temples was not merely for making offerings to the gods, but also to proclaim the powerful majesty and sacred status of the Egyptian pharaoh to the Nubians in the south, consolidating Egypt's rule over the region. In the 1960s, due to the construction of the Aswan High Dam, the Nile's water level would rise, threatening to submerge these two temples. At the initiative of UNESCO, the international community launched an unprecedented rescue operation, cutting these two temples into massive blocks and reassembling them on higher ground, allowing them to be preserved to this day, a miracle in the history of human cultural heritage preservation. Beyond the Abu Simbel temples, Ramesses II's architectural footprint is found throughout Egypt. In Thebes, he extensively expanded the Karnak Temple and Luxor Temple. The famous hypostyle hall at Karnak Temple was largely completed during his and his father Seti III's reigns, with its dense colossal columns appearing like a magnificent stone forest. At the entrance to Luxor Temple, his colossal statues and obelisks stand, one of which now stands in the Place de la Concorde in Paris. On the west bank of Thebes, he built his magnificent mortuary temple, the Ramesseum. Although this temple is now in ruins, its surviving colossal statues, the head of the famous Ozymandias statue, came from here, and vast courtyards still convey its former grandeur. In Memphis, he built new palaces and temples. In the Nile Delta, he established a new capital, Pi Ramesses, meaning House of Ramesses. This city was grandly planned, with magnificent palaces and numerous temples, becoming the administrative and military center of Egypt at the time. Ramesses II also frequently borrowed the constructions of previous pharaohs, engraving his name and statues on them, or simply demolishing older structures to use their stone for his own projects. This practice, while to some extent damaging the legacy of his predecessors, also made his name and image omnipresent, achieving his goal of proclaiming his personal achievements and deifying himself. Ramesses II's long reign and numerous offspring, to some extent, ensured the continuation of the 19th dynasty. However, after his death, due to the complexity of succession issues, many of his sons predeceased him, and possibly existing court power struggles, the dynasty's momentum began to wane. His 13th son Merneptah inherited the throne, by which time he was already old. During Merneptah's reign, Egypt faced invasion threats from Western Libyan tribes and the Sea Peoples. He successfully repelled these invaders and, in his famous Israel Stele, mentioned his conquest of Israel. This is currently the earliest known textual reference to the name Israel. Nevertheless, the era of Ramesses II was undoubtedly a glorious pinnacle of the late New Kingdom in ancient Egypt. His formidable military prowess, his magnificent constructions throughout Egypt, and his successful self-portrayal as a divine figure all make him one of the most memorable pharaohs in ancient Egyptian history. The legend of Ramesses the Great will forever echo on the banks of the Nile. However, the wheels of history roll forward, and even a powerful empire will eventually face new challenges. A mysterious force from the sea is about to bring great turmoil to the Mediterranean world, and Egypt will not be able to stand aloof. As the glorious era of Ramesses II gradually receded, and as the waves of the Nile still crashed against the immortal monuments he left behind, the Eastern Mediterranean world was undergoing an unprecedented upheaval. A mysterious and powerful force like a tsunami swept across this ancient land, destroying prosperous cities, toppling mighty kingdoms, and signaling the end of an era. They were the formidable Sea Peoples. In this cataclysm that engulfed the civilizations of the late Bronze Age, ancient Egypt, though also severely impacted, managed to survive as one of the few ancient kingdoms thanks to its deep foundations and tenacious resistance. The Sea Peoples were not a single ethnic group or nation, but a loose confederation composed of various tribes from different origins. Their exact origins remain an unresolved mystery for historians and archaeologists. Egyptian records mention several of their main branches, such as the Shurden, Peliset, often considered the later Philistines, Lucca, Ekwesh, Teresh, Danayan, and Cheker, among others. Their homelands might have been spread across various corners of the Mediterranean, including the Aegean region, the coast of Anatolia, Asia Minor, Cyprus, and possibly even from more distant Western Mediterranean or Black Sea regions. What drove them to leave their homelands and embark on a path of conquest and migration? It could have been famine caused by climate change, internal population pressures, or even invasions by other more powerful tribes. Regardless of the reason, from the late 13th century BCE to the early 12th century BCE, this torrent began to strike the various civilized centers of the eastern Mediterranean coast with unprecedented scale and destructiveness. The Hittite Empire, once a mighty rival to Egypt, disintegrated under the impact of the Sea Peoples. Prosperous Syrian coastal city-states such as Ugarit were completely burned down, their clay tablets recording desperate pleas for help before their destruction. The Mycenaean civilization, once the glorious overlord of the Aegean, also moved towards decline and collapse. The entire eastern Mediterranean plunged into chaos and darkness. Trade ceased, cities became desolate, and culture withered. A Bronze Age international system that had lasted for centuries quickly dissolved. Ramesses III's resistance, the last barrier of Egyptian civilization, in the face of this all-encompassing disaster, Egypt was not spared. As early as the reign of Merneptah, son of Ramesses II, Egypt had already faced a joint invasion by the Sea Peoples and Libyan tribes. Although successfully repelled, it had sounded an alarm. As history entered the 20th dynasty, during the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses III, approximately 1186 BCE, 1155 BCE, the threat from the Sea Peoples reached its peak. Ramesses III was the last great native pharaoh in ancient Egyptian history. He deeply understood the gravity of the situation, facing a pincer attack from both land and sea. The Libyan tribes to the west were stirring again, and the more deadly threat came from the combined fleet and land forces of the Sea Peoples, who, like locusts, destroyed everything in their path, aiming directly for the fertile Nile Delta. Ramesses III extensively recorded his desperate struggle against the Sea Peoples on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu on the west bank of Thebes. These reliefs and inscriptions, with vivid and exaggerated techniques, depicted the ferocity of the war and the pharaoh's bravery. He first confronted the combined land forces of the Sea Peoples and Libyans, and after fierce fighting, successfully prevented their advance into the heartland of Egypt. However, the true decisive battle took place at sea. The bloody Battle of the Nile Delta, victory and cost in the 8th year of Ramesses III's reign. The massive fleet of the Sea Peoples attempted to land through one of the Nile's mouths, intending to invade the heart of Egypt. Ramesses III had already anticipated this. He gathered the Egyptian navy and laid a trap at the mouth of the Nile. The reliefs at Medinet Habu vividly recreate the scene of this naval battle. Although Egyptian warships might have been less agile than those of the Sea Peoples, the Egyptians, relying on their familiarity with the terrain and clever tactics, lured the enemy into narrow channels. Egyptian archers unleashed a volley of arrows from both the shore and their ships, heavily damaging the enemy forces. Egyptian soldiers armed with spears and shields engaged in fierce hand-to-hand combat with the Sea Peoples, attempting to board their ships. The scene shows the Sea Peoples' ships capsizing, soldiers falling into the water and the Egyptians binding prisoners, celebrating their victory. This decisive battle at the mouth of the Nile ended in an Egyptian victory. Ramesses III successfully blocked the wave of Sea People's invasion at Egypt's doorstep, preserving the peace and tranquility of the Nile Valley. He was thus hailed as the savior of Egypt, his achievements comparable to those of his predecessor Ramesses II. However, this victory came at a heavy cost. Years of war exhausted Egypt's manpower, material resources, and finances. Although the invaders were successfully repelled, Egypt's national strength was severely weakened as a result. Control over frontier regions, particularly in the Syria-Palestine area, further declined. The domestic economy also faced difficulties, inflation worsened, and social tensions began to emerge. In the late reign of Ramesses III, the first recorded workers' strike in Egyptian history even occurred. Craftsmen building royal tombs stopped work in protest due to prolonged lack of rations.